Namaste. The unconscious mind has forever been a subject of fascination. To explore the history, color, and flavor of the unconscious, we partake the journey today with our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Can you explain what is unconscious mind and if unconscious and subconscious are one and the same?
Psychoanalysis found that there is a part of mind that is outside of our awareness and control. And this part of mind, which undertakes all the psychic activities, which processes emotions, thoughts, fantasies, desires operate there, and superego functions like guilt and shame can also operate from there. However, we are not aware of it, we are not in control of it, we cannot access or change anything there by will. This part of the mind, which has an autonomy of its own, creativity of its own, desires and fears of its own, and where fantasies operate, primary processes operate, and you have storage of events, storage of trauma, the roots of pathology, the generation of pathology, uh, the pre-verbal as well as the verbal elements, the visual and non-visual elements, that area where instinct transforms into a psychic entity, all of that collection, which is outside of our awareness and control. And if we believe in past lives, then even the karmic traces would be there. All of that is called as, termed as unconscious mind. Unconscious because the definition of consciousness here is taken to be synonymous with awareness. That because we are not aware of it, it is not in our awareness, it is not in our control, and therefore it is outside of our consciousness, meaning outside of our awareness, and therefore it is unconscious. This is the classical psychoanalytic definition, that that part of the mind outside of awareness and control is the unconscious mind. There are many people who don't believe in this definition of consciousness. They don't believe that consciousness and awareness are synonymous. And therefore, they have a very different take on what the mind is, what the consciousness is, and so on. They come from a spiritual background where it is a possibility that you enter a state of no thought, where there is no conscious psychic activity, but there is a clear awareness. And therefore, for them, uh, consciousness takes various forms like waking consciousness, sleep consciousness, dream consciousness, and the fourth state they say Turiya, which is awareness across all of them, a separate kind of a awareness. So this is where the differences come up in the East and West. But normally, in psychoanalytic and Western terms, that part of mind outside of awareness and control is called the unconscious mind. Coming to the word subconscious, uh, Sri Aurobindo has made a difference between the unconscious and the subconscious. And some others also have done the same thing. What he says is this. He says that what Freud calls unconscious is not conscious. It is just not aware. So the psychological activities of thinking, of affect processing are there. And therefore, you cannot say consciousness is not there. It's a different sort of a consciousness, not aware, outside of range of awareness, but it's not unconscious. It is below the level of consciousness or below the level of awareness, and therefore he calls it the subconscious, the subliminal, subconscious, where the there is consciousness because psychic activity is operating, but it is below the level of awareness, and therefore, instead of the word unconscious, Sri Aurobindo uses the word subconscious. However, uh, in psychoanalysis and in traditional psychotherapy, we use the word unconscious to denote that part of the mind which is outside of awareness and control.
So, sir, how long is the history of the concept of unconscious mind?
The history of unconscious mind is very old. Contrary to what many
Mhm.
people believe, it does not start with Freud. Although Freud was the first to describe in details and to really work with it in a very scientific and comprehensive way, but the history of unconscious mind is much older than Freud. In the ancient Indian tradition, we have the word, two words. We have the word called Sushuptaman, and then we have the word called Auchetan. And both these are uh, loose synonyms of the unconscious mind. We also have a word which is called Chitta, which also is a loose synonym of the unconscious mind. So, in very ancient Indian models of the mind, we find mention of that part of the mind which is outside of our awareness and control. The difference being in the Indian tradition, that part of the mind contains imprints from the past births also. But regardless of the concept of past births and effect of past birth on the present psyche, the point that a part of the mind outside of awareness and control exists is present in very old Indian models of the mind, which go back to thousands of years. The uh, least count is around 5,000 to 7,000 years. So that is much before uh, Freud coined the word unconscious. Then we have in the Western tradition, we have Mesmer, who did lot of experiments with hypnotism and mesmerism. And he and many others who have done experiments with hypnotism almost 100 to 250 years before Freud, they also knew of this idea of the unconscious mind, which could be accessed only through hypnosis. Then we have in the more scholarly tradition in the West, we have Nietzsche, who talked about the hidden sources of human passion. And uh, that passion often being the basis of conscious human thought. The French philosopher Rousseau also referred to the unconscious passions. His famous statement was, when reason turns against man, man will turn against reason. Which means, by man, he means many more entities other than reason. Man was not only reason. And that included many of the unconscious, unseen passions, which today constitute a very strong component of what we call the unconscious. And then we have Schopenhauer, who famously said, men think they are drawn from in front, but in fact they are pushed from behind. So he did refer in in an implied way to the concept of the unconscious mind. And then we have Freud, who most elaborately and scientifically dealt with the unconscious mind for pathogenesis and healing in a very comprehensive scientific way in modern times.
So, sir, how does psychoanalysis look at unconscious mind?
Different schools in psychoanalysis and different thinkers have a different take on the subject. The common minimum is this: that there exists unconscious mind, a part of mind outside of our awareness and control. That part is more important than the conscious mind when it comes to pathogenesis and healing. And there are usually uh, certain routes like dream analysis, pre-association, art, sleep, and hypnosis to access that unconscious mind indirectly. So this is a common belief, a common meta psychology shared by all schools of psychoanalysis. But after that, when we take the next step of the model of the mind and how the unconscious and the conscious are constituted in that model of the mind, then the schools of psychoanalysis differ. The Freudian school, the Freud has a very simple model of the conscious, the pre-conscious, and the unconscious. And the id being completely in the unconscious, the ego and superego partly being in the conscious, partly being in the unconscious. Coming to Jung, he had an idea of a conscious with an ego in the conscious, and below the conscious, a personal unconscious, below that, collective unconscious, and the self. So in Jung, the in Freud, the unconscious was a very personal thing. It is created by repression of unacceptable or dangerous desires, fears, traumatic memories, and so on. In Jung, apart from this Freud's personal unconscious, there was another layer of unconscious, what he called the collective unconscious, which was created by our genetic structure and the experience of evolution of the race. And this was a natural given, which expresses differently in people, but the core is natural given. So this was Jung's idea. And then we have the recent explorations into the unconscious, which gives us some window through ISTDP work, where we see that there is an access possible to the unconscious, what they call the breakthrough. If one is able to remove that layer of anger and guilt, which usually covers up our access to the unconscious, which impedes actually our access to the unconscious. So that's a new take on what the unconscious is. There is another school which is slightly psychedelic in its origin, where certain substances which are more used in shamanic practices, ayahuasca, I forget the name, I forget the name of that chemical, but I think in USA it has been recently very popular, very powerfully used in research studies. I forget the name, but uh, otherwise it's a banned substance under the Drug Control Act. But this is a second strain of thought where using certain substances, one is able to reduce the power of the repression barrier and get access to the unconscious. So that's a very different understanding and management of the unconscious in terms of the model of the mind and in terms of getting access to the unconscious. And then we have the approach of the hypnosis, where in a very different kind of way, you get access into the unconscious. So how the unconscious is, and yes, we have the Lacanian model of how the unconscious is, which goes into the registers and the verbal and the pre-verbal, the signifier and the signified, and the slip between the experience and its verbalization. So we have all these different approaches and takes on what the unconscious is, how it is constituted, and how to access it and manage it for healing or self-development.
What do we know today in specific about the color and the flavor of unconscious mind?
Uh, we know certain things in a disjointed way.
Hmm.
We don't have a coherent theory of the structure and the functioning of the unconscious. But we do have uh, disjointed, isolated packets of knowledge. And the future endeavor has to be to put it together. Of course, you can put it together only when you add certain things. As it is, the packets can't be put together and therefore they are not put together. Uh, the first insight that we have is that in terms of the content, the unconscious contains one, the traumatic memories, two, the material which is not used for a long time, three, unacceptable desires, fourth, unnecessary material which is not necessary for the moment, and five, uh, stimulus which is half processed, quarter processed at any given point in time. It was never fully processed. We also have the verbal and the pre-verbal memories. So this is in terms of the constituents of the unconscious. Then we come to the working of the unconscious. We realize that desires operate in the unconscious, superego operates in the unconscious, thoughts operate in the unconscious, feelings operate in the unconscious. Defensive action happens at the unconscious, which means the unconscious is a space where desires are fulfilled, frustrations happen. The space has faculties either of its own or it is sharing the faculties with the conscious, and it has substantial creativity and autonomy. And this unconscious is not really rational and not subservient to our will. So that is the second element of the unconscious, the function. The third is the way defenses operate. And that we get many insights from ISTDP, which tell us that often one affect covers up the other affect. So most usually, anger covers up many things in the unconscious mind. And once the anger comes up, many other things also come up and we get a wholesale access to the unconscious. We also realize that the same affect can be used as a defense or the same affect can be the core problem. So in certain instances, sadness is a defense, weeping is a defense to cover up anger. And in some cases, sadness itself is a problem. So the same affect can either be used as a defense or it can be the core problem itself. And then we realize that in some way, in some shape, in some geometry, in some flavor, in some strength, the thought, the emotion, and the energy are together in the unconscious. Now, what is the shape of that entity that you call the complex, which has thought, emotion, and energy together? And what is the actual nature of the resistance which is covering it up? Is it only use of affects to cover up affects, or are we looking at resistance as a separate entity which either covers up the affects itself or uses affect to cover it up? Those are the kind of questions which we really don't know much. And I personally believe that one way to structure the unconscious in macro terms is can be this, that you have the surface unconscious, you have the early life unconscious, below that you have the archetypal unconscious, and below that you have the deep and what I call the dark unconscious, the real dark unconscious. And many of the traumas which are not accessible to us might be in that dark unconscious.
Could be past life as well, the dark
Might be past life
unconscious.
as well. And
Hmm.
structurally, as I imagine this to be one on top of the other, it may also be that in later life, maybe a very strong and powerful event can actually become so affect creating that it may still go into the dark unconscious. So it may not be strictly chronological. Apart from the chronology, it may also have the strength of affect kind of a variable determining who is going to populate that particular segment. But I do feel from whatever I have seen of the unconscious that we do see these four different layers of the unconscious: the surface, the early life, the collective, and the dark unconscious. And the dark unconscious has quite an amount of pre-verbal, unattenuated, very infantile kind of uh, material. And mythologically, what is represented as the Patal Lok, the worst of all the lokas, might well be that unconscious, that dark unconscious.
So must be equally difficult to access that part.
Yes, it is very difficult to access it.
Hmm. So how are we able to access the unconscious mind today?
Uh, we have three broad ways of accessing the unconscious mind. I would use a plumbing terminology and use three words. One is uh, a kind of a uh, spillover. Second is leakage, and third is drilling the hole. The spillover is when the unconscious trauma or affect becomes so high that they spill over into symptoms. And the symptoms tell us some story about the unconscious. So, an indirect way of accessing the unconscious, not accessing, but understanding the unconscious, is
Dur, far off, is it the psychosomatic disease or no? Not.
both psychosomatic as well as purely psychological.
Okay.
Because correlated with every symptom is what I call the story of the symptom.
Right. Hmm.
The story of the symptom is essentially in the unconscious. Symptom tells a story. It may
Okay.
not tell a full story. It may tell one part of the story. The full story being in the unconscious, but still it reveals a part of the story. We may not have knowledge in specific terms, but we do have knowledge in essential terms. So we have essential knowledge, not necessarily scientific or comprehensive knowledge, but we do have essential knowledge by virtue of the very symptom that we see. So limited essential knowledge of the unconscious and an indirect access to it thereby comes out of the story of the symptom itself. So this is what I call the spillover. The second is what I call the leakage. And the leakage happens in five ways. One, we can access or understand the unconscious by free association. Two, by dream analysis. Three, by slips, slips of tongue, slips in writing, slips in actions. Fourth, by arts. If somebody produces art or interprets art, we see the unconscious functioning there. And fifth is by hypnosis. So these are the sort of uh, leakages that happen. And then we have very violent ways of drilling into the unconscious, which I call the drill a hole kind of approach. And that comes out in ISTDP or in very confrontational psychodrama or in case of holotropic breathing, where through some very powerful, forceful events that are created by us. We create a crisis and sort of drill a hole through the layer of concrete of the repression barrier into the unconscious. So these are the broad ways. A softer way also is meditation and psychedelic substances. So they are spiritual, mystical ways to access the unconscious.
So precisely my another question, how does spirituality look at the concept of unconscious then?
Spirituality looks at the concept of unconscious more from the purification point of view. It also looks at unconscious more in terms of rebirth and reincarnation. It also looks separately in the unconscious because most spiritual schools believe in the existence of soul or spirits, and the spirits can be good or bad. And in the spiritual view of things, some of the bad spirits also play a part in psychopathology. So they also view the unconscious as being one of those places where in the whole space of the unconscious there are traumatic sites, and in these traumatic sites, some of them, not all of them, there may be presence of what they call as evil spirits. And these are the differences that it has with classical science. The second element is how to manage the unconscious, how to purify it. So spirituality uses tools like yoga, breathing, mantra, visualization, idol therapy. What is called idol worship actually is very scientific idol therapy, if one knows the science how to do it. And then energy healing tools like Reiki, pranic healing, Tai Chi, acupressure, acupuncture, alchemical substances where minerals or metals are treated in a particular way, Ayurvedic herbs which help in self-purification, uh, ritual psychedelic substances. Like in India, there used to be a very long tradition of ganja and charas treated in a particular way, not the way people do it on the streets, but treated in a particular way. And in ancient Veda, we have the ultimate psychedelic for self-transformation, which was the Somarasa. And in recent times, a person who is still living, Sri M, he has mentioned in his book how he had been given that substance and how that substance helped in his own self-transformation. So there is this very wide metallic alchemical uh, path and a very wide herbal and psychedelic substance path, which spirituality uses, apart from all other techniques of mantra, yagna, idol therapy, chanting, the power of visualization, the power of superego, which is marshaled for self-purification, the power of internalization of a good God or a good guru. So these are the ways in which the spiritual approach to managing and purification and transformation of the unconscious is more liberal, more holistic, more diverse, and different from the classical way psychotherapy approaches the same subject.
Okay. And does the unconscious play a role in group events?
Very much so, because one of the characteristics of the unconscious is that there are three stages with regard to affect generation, affect regulation, and symptom formation. Now, because most of us don't have any control on affect generation or affect regulation or symptom formation, it just seems completely unconscious. However, when too much affect is generated and we are not able to regulate it, either it gets into symptom formation or it gets projected on other people. And in group processes, this is very important. that quite an amount of anger, envy, uh, morally unacceptable entities which we are not able to manage within ourselves to project onto others. In that sense, we all need someone to hate in order to survive. And similarly, all groups need the other group, which is a parking lot for vehicles of their own pathology, which they don't have any parking space inside. So in that sense, for group peace, for avoiding group conflicts, for creating positive synergy in groups instead of group conflicts, we all have to manage our unconscious. Unfortunately, uh, in conflict resolution, we have never taken this micro track. We have always focused on the macro track, and no wonder the macro track was bound to fail because it does not address the root cause.
We realize how important it is to manage the unconscious so as to be at peace.
Yeah,
So, is it necessary? I mean, it is necessary, right, for individual and even collective level.
right.
And do you see any psychological tools to do it? Uh,
Uh, in fact, we already have many. Unfortunately, we are not using as such. So what has happened is, when it comes to managing the unconscious, managing our entire mind for a better quality of life, for individual and society, we already have a basket full of tools. But these tools are disjointed, owned up separately by schools of psychotherapy or spirituality, and they never come together. So CBT would have its own set of tools, psychoanalysis would have its own, ISTDP would have its own, spiritual schools would have their own, mystical schools would have their own. What is necessary is we bring all of them together for holistic healing. And this would lead us to the idea of 5 layers of a human integer: the physical body, the energy body, the emotional body, the mental body, and the karmic body. And for each body, we have a set of 5 to 10 tools, 50 tools in total. And for an individual, we pick and choose which tool is the best for given body and which is best synergetic for other tools used for other bodies. Even if you don't believe in the concept of 5 bodies, you can look at it in terms of a more secular conceptualization of 5 aspects of a human personality. You would still have the same approach to healing. And this is where the promise is that the first low hanging fruit is to use already what we have and create synergy and congruence between them. And the second is how to innovate in that area. And my personal feeling is that we have 4 or 5 ways, 4 or 5 paths on which rapid innovation and radically uh, better tools can be forged. One is pranic healing, second is crystal healing, third is psychedelic substances, fourth is certain uh, breathing techniques which may include pranayama or holotropic breathing, and fifth is the whole scientific process of idol worship or idol therapy, of which there are parts of psychodrama, parts of visualization, imagination, mantra, sound, everything is used as a part of the whole process. So idol therapy is a very integrating process in that sense. My feeling is on these 5 routes, we should be seeing a lot of innovation and development of radically more efficient tools for managing the unconscious in the next 5 to 10 years.
So, how do you see the concept of unconscious evolving in future? I mean, A little more specific.
Yeah. My feeling is that the first thing we will see is the structure of the unconscious, whether it is only personal or can we empirically prove the collective part. Second is the kind of model that I have put forward of the surface, the early life, the collective, and the dark. And a similar model that I had first put forward in the heat model of the mind. So that is where we will need some, we will get some idea on the structure of the unconscious. And my feeling is, apart from psychology, neurology will help in this regard. And the area of neuropsychoanalysis will be a great tool for enlightening us on this aspect of the structure of the unconscious. Second would be the access and management to it. And therefore, and in that area, we can start with ISTDP of how to get access, how to create a enduring change inside. And the third will be the state of healing, because in many healing methods, including ISTDP and hypnosis, and also psychoanalysis, we are creating a state, and then after creating a particular state, by using the frame or the basics of that healing method, then we use the tools. So creating the state and understanding of how the most efficient healing state can be created for the unconscious, and then which best tools can be used. This state and tool, this combination and conceptual focus on this part of healing the unconscious is a third thing which I think will evolve very fast. Fourth will be the nature of defenses, because in ISTDP we get very good insight how one affect covers up the other and how affect itself can be used as a defense. So till now we were only talking about defense as a metaphor, but what actually it is in operation, that slowly will uncover itself. And once we realize what the defense actually is, we'll be far more efficient and better off in dealing with defenses. And last is the nature of what we call the core pathological entity, the complex. How do the idea, the feeling, and the energy come together? Or is it something completely different than what we are anticipating? So when we say a trauma has happened, what has exactly happened? Is there a blockage of energy? Is it a thought? Is it a feeling? Is it all together? Is it all together and something else that we don't know? So what is this core pathological entity called the complex? And that will get us into the core of memory and pathology. And these are the tracks on which I think our understanding of the unconscious will rapidly grow in the next 5 to 10 years.
So now we know how important it is to manage your unconscious, much more than uh, awareness. I mean, I think we can start with awareness, but there's a lot more to it. And hope you all enjoyed our discussion on unconscious. Thank you very much, sir, again for your insights. And people do watch and write to us. You can mail us at hvindia@gmail.com. Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.